The world is changing. Inspiration is everywhere. It has never been so easy to connect, share, and bring people together. We're learning from others and finding the best in ourselves. Challenging our beliefs. Sharing our vulnerability. Overcoming our fears. Transforming ourselves so we can transform the world. How far can we go?
This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is...
This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is Richard Dawkins, the evolutionary biologist, outspoken atheist, documentary filmmaker, and international best-selling author. You are an emeritus fellow at Oxford University, a fellow at both the Royal Society and the Royal Society of Literature, and considered one of the most respected scientists on the planet. You're the author of 17 books, including The Selfish Gene, the bestseller which popularized the idea of the gene as the fundamental unit of natural selection, and The God Delusion, which outlined your belief that science and reason naturally point towards atheism. You're also the first person to introduce the concept of memes as the cultural equivalent to genes, which has since brought rise to an entire field of study called memetics. Your latest book, Flights of Fancy, Defying Gravity by Design and Evolution, explores how nature and humans have learned to overcome the pull of gravity and take to the skies. Richard, welcome to London Real.
Thank you very much.
It's great to have you here, and I can't wait to jump into this book, Flights of Fancy, because first of all, I have two young boys, they're 5 and 6 years old, and the illustrations are incredible on this book. It's something I know their eyes are gonna go right to, and they're gonna start asking me all these questions about some of these animals that glide and some that fly and some insects. And so, I know you have another book where you had, illustrations, and it was also for a younger audience, but was this something that you wanted to do, or write a book for ages 8 to 80 for some time?
Yes, the earlier book you referred to is called The Magic of Reality. And in that book, each chapter begins with a question, something like, what is an earthquake? Why do we have winter and summer? And the chapter then begins with mythological answers to the question, myths from all over the world, and then it gives the scientific answer. And I thought I might do another volume of Magic of Reality. And the first chapter I thought of was flight. But then flight kind of grew into a whole book, which became Flights of Fancy. And I enjoy learning up all aspects of a subject, including the physics and the biology and the mythology, actually. And so yes, that's how it got started.
And you kind of open the book and talk about how, as humans, we are fascinated by flight. And you go back to maybe the old drawings of Michelangelo. And I was telling you earlier, I used to fly helicopters, and I just remember being in the air in this device thinking, this is just magic. Like, I can't believe I'm up here. And what is this fascination?
I think a helicopter must give you a wonderful feeling of freedom, because
it does.
You can land anywhere you like and take off again. And
yeah, it's very unrestricted. We can hover and fly with the doors off. And
so it's rather like a hoverfly, which can dodge around and stand hovering still, and then go backwards, upwards, forwards, downwards, even upside down, actually, which I wouldn't recommend in a helicopter. Yes, I think everybody is, most people are fascinated by flight, and many people share with Leonardo da Vinci the ambition to try to get up in the air. And he designed many flying machines, none of which would have worked, but he obviously had this great ambition.
There's a picture in the book of one of his drawings. I think it looks like a hang glider, maybe. It looks like maybe an early version.
Some of his things look like hang gliders. He also had various flapping versions, what were called ornithopters, where the man in the harness was supposed to flap his arms and obviously trying to mimic a bird. That turned out to be the wrong answer. You can't do it by mimicking a bird. Right. You have to start from scratch. He also designed a kind of helicopter which was an Archimedes screw, a screw that's supposed to screw itself into the air. And the motive power for that was 4 men with a capstan running round and round and round in a sort of runway. And of course muscle power couldn't possibly generate enough power to lift themselves. But also it had no stabilizing, what on a modern propeller is provided by the rear propeller. Otherwise it just spins round and round and round, and that's all. Even if his machine had got off the ground, it would have just spun round and round and round.
Yeah. Do you think if he had the materials and the electric motors in his lifetime, he might have been able to create something?
Well, yes, if he'd had enough. Human muscle power is not enough. It depends upon a much greater source of power than that.
Right. And in the book you kind of go through the hot air balloon, and then we kind of see the Wright brothers, and it's kind of fascinating to know that 6 decades later now we're on the moon. I mean, it's amazing.
That's an astonishingly short time, actually, from the Wright brothers to Neil Armstrong. Ridiculously short space of time.
Yeah. I had my sons out, and we were watching the moon, and I was explaining the phases of the moon, and I said they put a man on the moon, and they both look at me like I'm crazy. Like, it's still almost inconceivable if you're a human on this planet to look up there and think we put one of our people up there.
It's a long time ago now. I mean, it's amazing that such a long time has elapsed since that time.
Yeah, 60 plus years. I think they're going back. It's the latest.
Yes, the mission was cancelled a couple of days ago.
Okay, all right, but the plan is there. So in the book, you start looking into all sorts of variations of flight, gliding, and all sorts of some of the evolutional implications on that. What did you discover in writing this book?
I learned about how planes work, for example. I was always a bit vague about what keeps them in the air. I still don't really understand how they manage to carry enough fuel to keep themselves up in a great big airliner that can fly actually from here to Australia.
It's amazing.
Without stopping. To carry enough fuel to convey that fuel all the way, let alone all the passengers and goods and things that it can do as well, I find very difficult to understand. I mean, I understand the physics of it, but I didn't understand the economics of it. And I didn't really know about Bernoulli's principle and the fact that planes work in two different ways, the Newtonian and the Bernoulli way, so I learned that. And I learned about aerial plankton, lots of different things.
And you also learned that some things that we recreate with mechanics aren't recreated in nature. So there's no natural organisms that are lighter than air per se.
Yes, that's right. One of the ways, one of the chapters of the book is about lighter than air flight, balloons using either hot air or helium or hydrogen. I kind of try to speculate about, or try to wonder why it is that no animal has done that. Because the ingredients are there. I mean, there are organisms that produce hydrogen and methane, which is also lighter than air. And there are organisms that produce silk, and silk is good for making the envelope of a balloon. But no animals actually put them together. So there are plenty of animals that float about not exactly lighter than air, but where the surface area is so large compared to their volume and their weight. One of the points of physics is, as you know, that the smaller an object is, the larger is its surface area compared to its volume. So something like the fairy fly Tinker Bella, which is actually a wasp, we've got a picture of it in the book, flying through the eye of a needle. It's so small that it would hardly need to bother to fly, it just kind of float around, not because it's lighter than air, but because its surface area is so great that the slightest waft of breeze, the slightest upcurrent, will just lift it without any effort. Whereas if you're as big as a human, as big as Leonardo, your surface area is so tiny compared to your weight that's not a chance. You just plummet to the ground.
Right, it's very hard because it's kind of, it's like r squared versus r cubed, right?
Exactly, yes.
It's the surface area is a squared ratio, and the other one is a cubed ratio.
Exactly.
So it gets to a point where it's almost physically impossible to have flight at certain sizes.
Yes, that's right.
Did you find out what was the largest flying being? Was it a dinosaur?
Well, Quetzalcoatlus was a pterosaur, a sort of giant pterodactyl, which was the size of a of a small aircraft, the size of a Piper Cub or a Cessna. And it must have mostly glided. It probably tried to flap a bit, but it must have glided, I suppose, from high places. A giant pterosaur, a huge great glider. And I suppose it probably took off from cliff tops and things. There is a suggestion that it might have punted itself into the air with using its elbows, and then it got into a thermal. But it probably made use of thermals like modern vultures and eagles do.
Okay. And you even talk about why. Like, why is flying something that was developed?
My kind of biologist is very keen on the question why, by which we mean what is the Darwinian survival value? What is it about flight that helps the animal to pass on its genes, survive to pass on its genes? And there are all sorts of different reasons. I mean, looking for food, escaping from predators, pouncing on prey from above, migrating to different places to keep up with climate changes. All sorts of different reasons why flight. It's almost a question that answers itself. It seems so obvious to us that flying would be a wonderful thing to be able to do.
I guess we look at how we use it, like you said, the international travel and cost effectiveness.
Yes.
Or what do we use drones for? Like just to get better views of things?
Yes, quite, yes, yeah.
And what was reconfirmed about evolution in doing all of this study that you saw? Were you reminded of certain things, or were certain things surprise you about some of the evolution of some of these beings?
I wouldn't say surprise, because I'm sufficiently imbued with Darwinism now that nothing very much surprises me. I suppose there are some quite remarkable adaptations in detail, things like, well, I just mentioned hummingbirds. Sorry, I mentioned hoverflies, but hummingbirds do it too, hovering like a helicopter. I became very fascinated by the symbiotic relationship between plants and insects and birds, pollinators, because the plants need their pollen to be transported from the male flower to a female flower. And some plants do it by wind, but I'd speculate, wouldn't it be wonderful if plants could have a little winged chariot to carry their pollen? And they probably would have evolved, excuse me, I should have warned you, I'm liable to, ever since I had a stroke in 2016, liable to get a croaky throat.
Okay, yeah, no worries. That was 6 years ago, right?
Mm-hmm. Plants would have benefited from having a little winged chariot to carry their pollen from male flower to female flower, but why bother? Because there are butterflies and bees and hummingbirds and sunbirds. And so all you need to do is bribe them or seduce them. In the case of orchids that look like a female bee or a female wasp, and the bee tries to copulate with the flower and gets dusted with pollen, gets covered with pollen, and then goes off and tries to copulate with another flower and delivers the pollen. And there are advanced versions of this, like the hammer orchid, which has there are about a dozen different species of hammer orchid in Australia, and each species has one species of wasp, which it's partnered with, so to speak. And these wasps, the male flies, the females don't have wings. The females just climb onto a plant somewhere, and the male comes and seizes the female and carries her off in his arms and mates with her on the wing. Well, these orchids have a dummy female on the end of a sort of arm with an elbow in the flower. So the male comes along, grabs the female, tries to lift her up, and the elbow of the plant bends, and the male gets smashed against the place where the pollen is, repeatedly, bang, 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 like that, and gets covered with these so-called pollinia, which are great big lumps of pollen that orchids have. Finally, he gives up on the effort to make off with this dummy female, flies off, and not having learned his lesson, grabs another one And again it goes bang, 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 and this time he delivers the pollen. That's an astonishingly detailed mechanism. There's another one called the bucket orchid, where there's a bucket filled with, the flower has a sort of bucket filled with fluid, filled with water. And it's got a slippery edge so that a male bee of a certain species only slips on the edge, falls into the water, and then swims and tries to struggle to rise, and finds the only way to escape from this bucket of water, so to speak, is through a tiny hole. And it struggles through this hole, and on its way through gets pollinia stuck to its back, so it flies off, and then again, sadder but not wiser, excuse me, falls into another one, and then struggles through that hole, and then in this case the pollinia gets scraped off its back. Well, think of the intricate detail of the device by which these flowers get themselves pollinated, seducing a particular kind of insect. In the case of figs, it's even better because there are about 900 different species of fig, and each one has its own private species of wasp, tiny little wasps. So don't think of it as being like a real big yellow jacket. It's a little tiny wasp. And the very, very complicated cycle of activity, relationship between these wasps and these figs. A fig is actually not a fruit at all. It's a flower. There's a lot of flowers and inverted, a sort of chamber in which there are lots of flowers on the inside. And the relationship between the fig and the wasp is very, very complicated, extremely complicated. As I say, there are about 900 different species of fig and about 900 different species of fig wasp. And each species of fig has one species of fig wasp. So it's a real magic bullet that takes the pollen to the correct species of fig.
And that's all through evolution.
Yes. It evolves by Darwinian natural selection. The ultimate beautiful detail of these adaptations that come about through Darwinian natural selection inspires me.
You mentioned the one with the bee and is trying to mate with this organism and is bouncing back and forth.
Yes.
And it's funny because when a human would initially see that without training or science, they'd say, well, obviously that was created to make that. But they don't see the millions and millions of years.
They don't see that.
Mutations that created this thing that now seems designed.
There's the other thing that might occur to them, not with respect to the hammer orchid, but with respect to, say, lions and antelopes. You see, a lion is a beautiful machine for chasing antelopes and killing them, and the antelope is a beautiful machine for escaping from lions. Well, whose side is God on? I mean, why would he create? If he wants the lion to eat the antelope, why make it so difficult? And if he wants the antelope to escape from the lion, why make the antelope so fast at getting away from the lion? Why make the lion so good at catching antelope? So you cannot really reconcile, I think, a creator view with the fact that nature really is red in tooth and claw. There's an enormous amount of suffering, and the predators are beautifully designed to kill the prey, and the prey are beautifully designed to escape from the predators. So you think that, obviously, what's God in it for? Does he like the spectator sport? Is he a sadist? It
Right.
doesn't make any sense.
And we only see that because it's in homeostasis. If for some reason the lion was much better, there would be no prey.
Exactly. Yes.
And if the prey was so much better, there would be no lion.
Yeah.
And so we see this probably very temporary view. I mean, that might not exist 1,000 years from now or even 100 years from now because the world will change. But when we see it, it's very easy not to see the evolution behind it, and we see something that was created for us, like we might see a product that was created for us, or a beautiful coffee maker that does something similar.
We are surrounded by machines that are made for our benefit, by things, not just machines, but everything we look at, and all these cameras around here, and they're obviously made by somebody, there's no question about it. And so it's very, very tempting when you see a beautiful mechanism like an eye, which looks like a camera, to think of that as being designed, and it takes a great leap of brilliance, actually, with Charles.
To continue watching the rest of the episode for free, visit our website londonreal.tv or click the link in the description below.